Hi, I'm Andrew Yang, former presidential candidate and champion of getting more money into the hands of millions of Americans. I want to tell you about our new company, Noble Mobile, which is the first phone carrier that pays you to use your phone less. Did you know Verizon and AT&T paid out $18 billion in dividends to shareholders last year? That's money they make by overcharging you for data. Noble changes all that. You get unlimited everything on the T-Mobile network. Plus, when you use your phone less, you get up to $20 in cash back each month, and we give you a 5.5% interest rate on it. Most importantly, Noble members use their phones 17% less each month because, hey, people like money. And as a listener to this show, you can try Noble for just $10 if you visit noblemobile.com and use the code YANG10. Stop overpaying for your data. Go to noblemobile.com/yang10 and start getting paid to use your phone less today.
This is a Film Stories original podcast.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I am a writer and film critic and filmmaker as well, would you believe? And I am delighted to be joined by another writer and film critic and filmmaker and YouTuber, Thomas Flight. Thank you for joining me, Thomas.
Thank you, John. It's glad to be. I'm glad to be here.
You're the first. I think you're the first YouTuber I've had on the podcast, and I wanted to talk to you because I've been watching your essays. You do these long form essays. They're fascinating from lots of different angles. They're very in depth. But I wanted to talk to you specifically about two videos that I watched that I really, really sort of, I've had these ideas sort of bubbling around and they addressed these concerns, which one was to do with how the culture is shifting away from cinema, or cinema has no longer got this place that is so central in our culture. And the other one was specifically about how AI is affecting that, not only in terms of cinema, but in art generally. Now, these are really big topics, so let's not...
Yeah.
Exactly. But so before we do that, could you just tell us a little bit about how you started with the YouTube channel and how you got into writing about film and film generally?
Yeah. So I came into it from the filmmaking side. Coming out of high school, was really interested in filmmaking, had been making movies at home with my friends and stuff. And that extended into, I didn't go to film school, but I had a bunch of friends who were in film school and they invited me to come work on their thesis projects. And I got to kind of play every role on the set and learn it by doing it. And then ended up working at a small video production company where we made like local commercials and social media stuff. And that was also a great experience where it was so few of us at the company that I got to learn every part of the process. I did everything, grip, cinematography, editing, produce, you just do it all. And so I had this kind of like comprehensive view of what the filmmaking process looked like, and was also just watching movies obsessively and trying to understand how they worked, and started seeing these people on YouTube, like some early ones like Tony Zhou's Every Frame of Painting, making these video essays, and they would break down a certain aspect of, here's how this is done in the film. And I had been obsessed with behind the scenes stuff for a while. Like every movie I would watch, I would go watch the director's commentary, and I was always just fascinated by that stuff. And so I was watching these video essayists on YouTube early days and was like, I think I could make one of these. I have some thoughts about movies. Had no credentials, had not studied, film study, no criticism background, anything like that. Just had a practical knowledge of film. And so I just started making these videos, put them up, and people watched them and they were like interested in what I had to say. So I kept making them. And I have been doing that for 7, 8 years at this point. So at some point, my work on YouTube just eclipsed everything else, and I was like, well, I guess this is my day job now. And so I kind of focused on that for a few years, and now I'm sort of entering back into filmmaking, getting back into some documentary filmmaking and that kind of thing. But I've always been self-taught with the filmmaking stuff, and now with more of my focus on media criticism, film criticism, just teaching myself as much as I can, studying as much as I can, and filling in all that background knowledge as best as I can, and doing my best to like, you know, convey that through the work.
That's what I love about your the way you treat your subjects as well. Is there's a real sense that you're going into it with this sense of curiosity, more than anything else. There's a real sense of like, no, I'm gonna, look at these questions in a head-on manner rather than I already know that there are these five possible answers. I'm going to find them for myself.
Yeah, and that's a reflection of, my process, and also, how I want to present myself. I'm exploring these topics, especially with something as big as some of the topics we're going to talk about today. If it's, oh, how was this specific technique done on a film set? You can research that, you can find out how it was actually done. You can sort of know objectively certain things about the making of a film and present that information more objectively. But when you're talking about the relationship between art and AI, or the movement of monocultural mediums or something like that, it's much more of a, nobody knows the definitive answer to these things. We can kind of put out theories, and I'm sort of trying to enter into that conversation and make my contribution to that conversation. But I don't have, none of us know right now what's happening with certain things. So my goal is not to like make the definitive statement, but just to put some thoughts out there and hopefully like help people have a perspective on what's happening, and being open to to other perspectives in that as well, or just like engaging in that conversation.
That's yeah, and it's that conversation that we're gonna have today, and I feel like there's an element as well that you and I even are approaching this from a necessarily different angle simply because of an age difference in that we have our
Right.
baseline my baseline begins in 1976, 77 in terms of the first time I went to the cinema, and your baseline would begin. When was the first time you went to the cinema?
I don't know the exact date. I should look that up, but sometime in the 2000s.
Right,
So I was born in the 90s, but we didn't go to the movies much when I was a kid.
right.
So I think it would have been like early 2000s, 2000, 2001,
Yeah, yeah.
that I would have started going to movies.
So I think I saw Dino De Laurentiis's King Kong as a remake. So that would have been, I mean, that would have been ridiculously young as well to be taken to the cinema. But I think I
Right.
benefited from having an older brother, and so there was a case of like, well, we have to take John because we can't leave him at
Yeah.
home, and and so I think I benefited from that, and it was also probably because I was very well behaved in the cinema. I think I didn't get my phone out. Because in those days, of course, it was a large Bakelite plastic phone with a wire that
Yes.
so, I definitely saw King Kong, and I have very vivid memories of seeing Star Wars at the cinema and queuing up around the block and sort of getting in after the crawl and the, which at that point I didn't know even had happened. Um, I remember the film starting for me with Darth Vader sort of breaking through the corridor and the rebels all being killed, and being terrified of it. I mean, absolutely, like what am I seeing? And enthralled and excited and all those things. So that was a very formative experience for me. So that to some degree that means that my experience was not only pre-digital, it was pre-VHS. These films were
Yes,
not
yes,
available on video cassette because nobody had video cassettes in those days, except for the very rich. Video cassettes would come in about the mid 80s, early to mid 80s in my area. I mean, there might have been
right.
existing elsewhere, and even on television, uh, Star Wars showed in 1978 on the cinema, 77 in London. This is a winter of 77, and then 78 winter in the north of England where I was from. But it wouldn't show on television until until 1982. So a
Yeah, yeah,
full 4 years after it had
for
shown.
sure. Yeah,
Um, so there was a scarcity as well. The cinema
right.
was very special because you couldn't, that's the only place you could see these films.
Yeah. And that affects like what the role of criticism as well. You know, I think back to that era and the role of a critic as someone who almost like reported on what was happening in the cinema. You like go to the cinema and then like report back in text form. That actually played a distinct role in the culture because now we see so much of a movie before it's even out because the video is everywhere and there's all this like press and clips and trail, you saw some of that of course at that time, but yeah, it's really fast. Like I didn't experience what you're talking about fully, but I remember a time where it was still, um, you know, there would be that huge gap where a movie would come out and then it's like you had to go see it if you wanted to see it, or it was going to be a long time before you might ever get to see that again.
And even if you did see it, when you did watch it, that experience, you were going to have to, we played Star Wars for years before we
Right.
saw it again, and we had the action figures
Yes.
so we
Yes.
could
Yeah.
reenact it. So it lived in our heads. And, you'll know this as well that, there'll be scenes that you thought you saw that you you didn't see, or the amount of time that the characters spend in the garbage compactor is
Right.
relatively short, but in my childhood memory, they're in there for like weeks.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, no, my version of that was my version of the experience you're talking about was Lord of the Rings,
Right.
and we were obsessed with that, and we played Lord of the Rings. And then that was also part of what got me into filmmaking, because Lord of the Rings came with such an incredible, probably one of the best produced behind the scenes documents that's ever been made. And so that was the beginning of my awareness of, oh, there's this entire world that exists behind the film. And so my friends and I, we played Lord of the Rings, but then we also played making movies. Like, that was kind of a product of being obsessed with those movies as well. Um, but yeah, it was definitely a different way of interacting with them as movies as pieces of media. And I think the another aspect of this, because we're talking about, something being available on TV or VHS or whatever, TVs at that time were a different thing than what they are now. Now everybody has this like 50-inch, or even if you're watching something, God forbid, you're watching a movie on your laptop, it's like you can watch it in 4K on a laptop with like headphones that are like high quality sound. That's a very different kind of experience. Still not a theatrical experience, but a very different kind of experience from popping in a VHS and watching SD and 4:3 on a tiny little TV. It's um, the experience of the movies that you were getting at home was not cinematic in the same way that some of the home viewing experiences are now.
Absolutely, pan and scan was all. I remember when there was a kind of trend just before DVDs came in of widescreen video cassettes. I remember
Yes.
like the Sergio Leone films. I think I've bought them 8 or 9 times because, as well as buying them on video, I bought them twice on video because I bought the widescreen versions as well.
I'm curious from your perspective because you've lived through more of this transition than I have. 'Cause this transition from sort of what cinema was in the 70s to what it is now. How has that, like, how have you perceived that transition, especially, I guess, like from from the like through the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, and then the last 10 years. Because to me, it feels like there's been a distinct shift in the last 10 years, even beyond how it shifted. I'm just curious your perspective on that, and if it like lines up with like how I've perceived that transition.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. It's been a great series of changes, as in a large, not necessarily all positive.
Right.
The cinemas that I used to go to, now I have massive nostalgia for, and we've got to be very careful of the with that sort of
Right.
element of it. I mean, but we did have Art Deco. I mean, it was the ordinary flea pit cinema had plush cushions and a curtain which would open and close, and the architecture and interior design was deep reds and womb like seductive chandeliers and stuff like that. There was a bar,
Yeah.
that people would go and have a drink, and there was a chalk ice lady that was in the 1970s. The 1970s, 80s would be a lady with a tray would come and sell ice creams at the front of the during the break, between the B film and the main feature. We'd have these shorts, usually the introductory shorts. So it wasn't really a B film, but it would be like cheese making in Belgium or something, and then you'd have the main feature. All of that is I'm very nostalgic for, even though at the time I was thinking, oh, come on, I just want to see, For Your Eyes Only. I don't
Right.
want to see, I'm not interested in cheese necessarily. I have really, really vivid memories of seeing things like Ghostbusters and the whole cinema being packed and being, kids jumping up and down, and a cinema manager coming out at one point with a microphone and telling everybody that they weren't gonna show the film if people didn't, behave properly. And those were very much burned into my memory. Um, one of the things that I think is very different from today is films just turned up. You did see trailers, obviously, but there was also the chance that a film would just arrive and you would go and see it, and you didn't have this 3 or 4 months. I mean, nowadays we know about Christopher Nolan's new film, well over a year in advance of it actually being released, and that feels, to some degree, that just feels like, do we really need that publicity to have such a
Yeah.
long sort of tail? And then when I went to university, so university was the 90s, and that was in Liverpool, and there were lots of different cinemas in Liverpool. A beautiful little art house cinema called the 051, which was again a sort of flea pit with relatively small screens and all the rest of it, but showed great double bills, very well curated. I would see things like Apocalypse Now and Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Derek Jarman double bills, and Jim Jarmusch double bills, and it have Seasons. Hal Hartley I saw for the first time there, so that was a real, and it were you discounted on Wednesdays for students and stuff like that. So absolutely. I had a series of friends who would work there as well, so they'd get me in either discounted or for nothing if I was particularly poor that week. And so those were really great experiences again. And the multiplexes, when they did appeared as sort of a positive thing, because it was like it gave you more opportunities to see more films. They were slick and modern and clean, and the quality
Yeah.
technically was pretty high, but they tended to be, because I was a student, I didn't have a car. They tended to be harder to get to because they were on the outskirts of the city. As What then happened was that they sucked out so much of for most of the, like, not so much for the cities like Liverpool, which would always have still has several central cinemas, but for towns of medium size, they would lose their inner city, inner town, the center cinema, the historical cinema, and all the audience would be sucked out to the multiplex, essentially,
Yeah.
the franchise cinemas. And so there was no longer a choice between the sort of old-fashioned cinema and the modern thing. And then the experience became very franchised. More recently, when I've gone to the cinema, sorry, this is a really long answer, but this is this is quite a few decades I'm going through now. Um, but the most recent sort of experiences of going to paying for a ticket and going to see films in Britain, it feels like they've the idea of sort of let's have dinner and a show. They're
Right,
trying to
right.
combine, so you're having dinner while you're watching the show,
Yeah,
and having people having nachos and dips and chicken wings and whatnot while
yeah,
you're watching a film. I don't know. To me, that feels like you're giving people. I want to go to the cinema because I want to leave my living room. I don't want to go to the cinema because I want to enter somebody else's living room and
right.
smell
Yes.
their food, and yeah, it's so that alienates me to some degree.
Yeah,
The number of this again, this sounds like a little bit of a peevish complaint, but I remember when there are certain adverts you'd only see at the cinema. There was a
right.
certain type of advert you would see at the cinema, and now you're seeing adverts that you'd see on television at the cinema, and you're just sort of thinking, "Hang on, I've bought my ticket. What
Yeah,
more, what more do I have to sit through in order? I bought a
yeah,
relatively expensive ticket and now I'm watching an advert, for a mobile phone company that I see 5 times a day on television. So why am I,
yeah.
you know,
No, I have it timed down. If I'm going to one of the multiplexes where, it's assigned seating, I know to the minute how late I can show up so that I can walk in and just like see the last one or two trailers and the start of the film because I just hate sitting through, you know, 15 minutes of it, yeah, like you're saying, it's not even trailers, it's 15 minutes of like television commercials um before the trailers even start, a lot of times, which I don't love doing.
how
But
do you feel about how it's changed? Because you must have noticed it's changed from, 2000 to now, the last
yeah, I
25
mean,
years.
growing up as a kid, the multiplexes were kind of all I knew as a start, and a lot of that was just like living in a rural area. So, we had to drive to get to the closest theaters, which were a multiplex. Um, and those experiences were fun. I remember going and, staying up till midnight for a midnight release, and queuing in long lines to get in. Like that was a fun part of the experience for certain releases. But then also like as a teenager, just my friends and I would go to the theater and we didn't know what we were going to watch. We would
Mm.
just go and be like, "Oh, let's pick something at random off the board that looked interesting." So that was a certain part of the experience too that I don't know, maybe there's kids that still do that, but it feel like that experience rarely exists anymore. And there was already some of that kind of commercialization that we're talking about now, but I don't think the multiplexes weren't struggling as much as they are now, and and so it wasn't as heightened as it is. Um, and it was more social and communal still at that point where a lot of movies were packed out. We see that very rarely now. If you went on a Friday night, whatever movie you were going to would be relatively full. It
Yeah.
didn't matter what it was. Now it's like, if you go on a Friday night, it's only going to be full if it's a exceptionally popular film, at least where I am most of the time. Um, and then as I've grown older, I've moved more into cities and, have been seeking out where can I get the best cinema and that kind of thing. And where I've lived recently in Asheville, there's a number of like independent cinemas. One of them's not operational at the moment, unfortunately, but they're coming back soon. But I've really enjoyed those as kind of like my home theater because even though the chairs might not be as comfortable or the screen might not be as high quality, it's like the people who are there because they really enjoy film. It would be a packed screening for Memoria, like or something like that, and there would be a sense of community and just like camaraderie around the films, and there's less of that, you know, 15 minutes of commercials or whatever before. Um, so I'm a big fan of that, but I understand like not everybody has access to those
Mm.
and they're kind of rare. Um, so um, I think, you know, my hope is that those places can stay alive and we can sustain them further. And I think, you know, part of what I argue for in that video is that I think I, I'm hopeful. I think cinema is going to continue to have a long life and be around for a long time. I think people will want the experience. Um, and a lot of I go into like a lot of multiplexes now, and it reminds me of like going into a bowling alley in like the 2000s, where you had this sense of like this is something from a bygone era.
Mm.
It's still here, it's still operational, but it's not. It's it's descended from whatever its heyday was, and um, and I have that feeling in multiplexes. But then the flip side of that is going into certain indie theaters and it's packed and people are talking about the movie afterwards and there's this sense of community. And so I think that's there and people want that. And I think the future for cinema is really in leaning into that instead of trying to get away from that and making this very like ultra, ultra like uh you know, you can go one direction, which is kind of what you're describing, which is give me the really comfortable recliner and the best screen and a meal to eat and all of these like things. I like that sometimes. That can be nice, but but the thing that really differentiates the cinematic experience now from the experience you can get in your living room is more so the communal aspect of I want to get together with a group of people and we all watch an interesting film and then maybe we talk about it afterwards or even if you don't just getting to experience something with people um, can be a compelling experience on its own. And I think that kind of transcends having the best food and the comfiest chair and the nicest screen.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's a the thing about the multiplexes. I remember when the Lord of the Rings films were out and the Harry Potter films, and I remember even prior to that, going to see like Eyes Wide Shut being you know you can get a ticket, and in the first flush of money, of investment, you know, the smell of fresh paint was still on them.
Yeah.
They were the future. They were like colored lights and everything, and it was really, you know, it was a shiny thing that everybody you wanted to go there. It was really making a very good argument for this is where I want to be on a Friday night. This is where I want to, you know, Tarantino, Pulp Fiction, everybody would turn up to go and see that sort of film, or, you know, and there were room for films like you know Kurt Russell's in Breakdown or something, you know, and rooms for films that were sort of big movies, but not necessarily movies with you know in franchises or in you know, massive movie stars. You know, someone like Kurt Russell, for instance, has never been a massive movie star. He's a lot of affection for him now, but he never broke through to that Bruce Willis, Arnold Schwarzenegger level. He was the guy that I mean, that's why he made so many films with John Carpenter, you know, because he was affordable,
Yeah.
you know. Including Elvis, which by the way is a really good Elvis biopic. I think his TV movie is superb. So I mean, what I did notice was when I went back to my hometown, which is Barrow-in-Furness, the multiplex, which had replaced the old Astra Cinema, had sort of torn out half their seats and put in these big comfy recliners, and it was everything was it's like supermarkets. There are no supermarkets anymore. Everywhere is like a metro market or an express market, so no one's going to do huge shops anymore. They're just stopping for milk and eggs and something for the cat because their huge shop is done on the internet. So the same thing is happening with cinemas. I feel they're becoming smaller, with the exception of the IMAX, which you mentioned in the video as well, which I see the IMAX as a little bit of I don't feel it's economically feasible as a way forward. It reminds me a little.
It's not practical for
Yeah,
everybody to be shooting on IMAX film.
precisely. Unless there's
You
going to
know,
be some
yeah,
way of digitally blowing everything up to that level.
yeah, yeah,
I don't see how they're going to be doing it. And it reminds me a little bit of, there's a gargantuism to it that reminds me of, what's that Disneyland film with Michael Jackson that everybody goes and sees when they go to Disneyland? It's like
oh yes, I know the one you're talking about,
Detective
but yeah,
XO or something. And
yeah,
um yeah, I mean, ooh, I'm on a what roller coaster. I feel like I'm really on a roller coaster, and I'm just sort of thinking, well, if I want to go on a roller coaster, I go on a roller coaster. I wouldn't go to the cinema to feel like I'm on a roller coaster. Which I guess was Martin Scorsese's point when he was talking about Marvel movies.
yeah, yeah,
So let's move on a little bit from the physical cinema,
yeah,
which I think is a really good point though, because people talk about the death of cinema, and I've always thought the death of cinema was a very French sort of way of thinking about anything. And it's much more significant to think about the death of a cinema because, physical cinema's dying, that,
right.
bricks and mortar and all the rest of it, that is irreplaceable parts of a community, and that is a real problem. I totally agree with you. Cinema is a way of looking at something. I don't see how that can die. That's like
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
opera will die. As long as people are singing, I don't think opera will ever die.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think it's going to be there. The the really, I think what we're talking about most of the time when we talk about the death of cinema is like the unseating of cinema as sort of the crowned king of the media culture. Um, and the kind of some of the argument that I make in the video I made about this is that that started happening in the 40s already when TV came about, and you could argue that perhaps TV and cinema have kind of been vying for that top spot a little bit through the era that we're talking about since the 70s, but it still had a huge amount of cultural impact through the 2000s and even still does today. But what we're seeing, especially within the last 10 years, is less and less of that. It matters, it still makes money, people still love it, but it's not the one thing that everyone's attention is kind of pointed towards in the same way that it would have been at one point. And some of that has to do with the physical in-person experience that you and I are talking about, have been talking about. And I think that stuff matters because you can say, oh, the movies themselves have changed from the 80s till now, and they have, but also our experience of them has changed. How we experience them has changed. And I think we don't give as much attention to that as maybe it deserves sometimes as critics. Um, but yeah, it's always going to be around in some form. But yeah, really the thing that's dying is that sense that it's the thing. And that's the one where I'm like, okay, yeah, that has gone away, and I don't know that that's salvageable or that that's gonna come back.
I mean,
It's
is it
like,
necessarily a bad thing?
right, yeah,
isn't culture always about, moving forward and going on to the next thing? And you can see that as fickle, and it's very dispiriting if you've devoted your life to something that
right, yes,
you've been used to it being the center. But if you're I last month I spent a week in Pordenone celebrating silent cinema, and there's a bunch of geeks and a bunch of academics and archivists and who, as far as they're concerned, cinema finished in 1925.
right, right, yeah. But the great thing about the current era is that if that's what you are fascinated by, you have more access to that stuff now, and you can find the other people who are interested in that in a way that wouldn't have been possible in any prior era. So, I think in some regard, it's like, okay, if you're really into silent cinema or experimental, you're doing like, you're into what's his name? He's sitting on my shelf. I can't think of it right now. But if you're into just really avant-garde experimental film, in some ways you can think, oh, I've missed the boat. You know, that ship has sailed. It's gone. It's a bygone era. But now you can find all these films that would have been impossible to find before. There's books, there's online groups about it. You can go to festivals and meetups, and those like niche cultures can still exist, uh, and still do, I think, more than people give them credit for. A friend of mine here in Asheville shot an like avant-garde experimental film documentary about this flood that happened. His name's Tristan Turner, and he like this the flooding hit our area, and they went out, they shot on 16 millimeter film. They processed the film in like the water from the flood, and it's just, you know, messed up grime and very abstract. And then they screened it at the public library here for like a group of like 40 people who all sat and very just like quietly watched this avant-garde film with like, you know, a live score. And I was just amazed that, you know, tiny little town here in Asheville, or I mean, small city, that kind of culture still exists in pockets, and there's people who will go and pay attention to it and watch it. And yeah, I don't think we should lose sight of that just because maybe we're not the thing that everyone is paying attention to the most anymore. There's still a lot of really interesting film culture happening if you know where to look and can find it.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I think you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, you have the example that you use in the video of sort of people all coming out of The Exorcist, and The Exorcist being sort of number one news and everybody talking about it, and it's sort of, you know, the water cooler conversation of the day, and you know, think pieces and news articles, all the whole thing. And nowadays, you know, with the exception of, you know, Barbie and Oppenheimer, we don't generally have that. Nobody's really talking about. Yeah, I've just written a piece on Sydney Sweeney, and it's just like there's so much news ink has been spilled. So many pixels have been occupied by talking about a jeans advert that she did, and nobody saw Reality, which was an amazing film and an amazing performance. And frankly, I don't care what her politics are. I mean, she's very likely. I very likely disagree with her politics fundamentally, but I disagreed with Errol Flynn's politics fundamentally. You know, I mean, does that stop me
Yeah.
from watching Errol Flynn films?
Yeah, if you've done a deep enough dive into cinema history, you have to have already come to terms with how do I feel about watching work from people who I disagree with, because it's like, well, good luck with like half of, you know, film history, if you're going to write
Exactly.
pieces of media off on that regard. I think like in those instances, it's interesting that like the media culture and event that surrounds the films in some ways has almost become bigger than the
Right.
films itself. It's like Sydney Sweeney as a character on the internet, and like the culture of generating media about her is in some regards like bigger. I mean, not in some regards, is literally bigger than any given individual piece of media that she's in. And that's all that existed in the past to some extent, but like in the past, if you had this huge megastar, it was like it was the movies that were making them the megastar. And then because they were in the movies, all this press is being generated about them. And that's sort of like a feedback loop that they use to market the films. Now it's like online, and what's happening on social media and all of these platforms is what's generating the stardom for new people. And then they use that to try to market the films. It's not necessary. I mean, to some extent, a film can still make someone a star, but like that balance, I think, has definitely shifted towards the the internet culture being the driving force in terms of like how we think about stardom.
And in her case, I mean, it's had the detrimental effect because her latest film seems
Yes.
to have tanked. I'm not sure that the subject matter of the film itself is not necessarily. I mean, I wonder how this film would have got made, perhaps without her,
Right.
in quotation marks, star power. The filmmaker David Michaud is someone I quite admire. I think he's made some good films in the past. The story is very compelling and it really deserves to be told. It's a really interesting story, but it being surrounded by this morass of sort of controversy and toxicity and just this willingness to sort of play politics by proxy with celebrity seems to be the thing that is, instead of encouraging people to see it, is dragging it down. In my view, somewhat unfairly, because I think a lot of people worked on that film and it deserves more of an area. If it is the case that people are not going to see it because of her, then I think that's a real
Right.
pity, because it might
Yeah,
not be the case.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that. It seems like a little too they happen so simultaneously,
Right.
like her controversy and the release of that film, that I'd almost be surprised if it was being like quote unquote boycotted for that reason. It almost seems more like not miscasting, because I think like casting someone of her type for that role is a fair artistic choice, but maybe just like not positioning that film for, like, is that film something the public was open to at this moment? It seems like maybe not. Whether or not that's a fair assessment, I don't know. I haven't seen the
No,
film
me
yet,
neither.
but
And obviously there's a problem with talking about something neither of us has seen.
yeah, exactly.
But I mean, I'm just arguing, I guess, for sort of open mind when it comes to. I mean, I'm not apolitical, and I believe in addressing politics as well as other considerations when you look at art. But in this case, sort of, it doesn't strike me as political. It strikes me as a gesture towards the political rather than the political itself, a simulacra of political action to just get a bit hissy about somebody on the internet because they're a celebrity you don't agree with. Anyway, let's move on from Sydney Sweeney, who who we don't need to contribute to that debate too thoroughly.
Nobody does selling better than Shopify. Shopify is the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret, with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts go abandoned and way more sales going through. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. On the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more, sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Skims uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period for 3 months at shopify.com/Westwood1, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Westwood1 to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/Westwood1.
We haven't sorted anything out there. We haven't, as you said at the very beginning, we haven't given a definitive answer on that, I don't feel.
Right.
But let's talk about so that centrality. If it does move on, we could say, well, that's fair enough. The Beatles are a better band because they broke up. Not everything has to last forever. In fact, as Game of Thrones proves, having a good ending in mind even before you start might be a good idea. So let's maybe that centrality of cinema, let's perhaps take that off the table. But cinema itself seems to be threatened almost like every cultural expression at the moment by the development of this new technology, which is going under this umbrella term of AI, although I know there's sort of really maybe more accurate to talk about technologies at this point.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of the elephant in the room for, as you said, not just cinema, but kind of art and media in general right now. And I think part of why it fascinates me is because, we're watching this really fascinating technology dawn, which is the computers can now generate media that is at least, a simulacra of things created by humans. And that's really fascinating on a lot of levels to me. Uh, it's a little eerie in a lot of ways. Uh, in especially early on, I was more intrigued by it when the images weren't very good and a lot of what was produced was kind of this strange, almost dreamlike. It felt like you were almost getting to peer into the computer's dream in some way, like it's a bizarre computer vision of reality or something like that. Um, and it brings up a lot of questions for us as humans, not just in the realm of art, but also with the large language models, what it means to what is logic and intelligence and language, and what do these things mean to us, and what do they represent, and where exactly are those lines between what is human and what isn't, and consciousness and how we think about those things. And art is one area of that I'm obviously very, very fascinated by. Um, and yeah, it's incredibly complicated because even just talking about art without this mixed in there is complicated.
Yeah.
You sit three people down in a room and ask them for their definition of art, and you'll get like three different distinct answers. And so trying to address this topic, art as a question within the context of AI, is obviously very complicated.
I liked,
But that's part of what fascinates me about it is like, well, why is it complicated? Like, let's talk about it. This is interesting.
I liked your the sort of definition you give in terms of you slip between art and artifact. The idea that an artifact can be a road sign, or it can be a flyer for a nightclub, and art can be Edward Hopper or Jackson Pollock or whatever. And the idea that art is something, the more you look at it, kind of the more there is to understand, or the further away it's sort of, there's a sense of what Derrida would call deferment. You're always kicking your hat down the road while you're trying to pick it up, whereas the stop sign, you look at it and you understand immediately what it's doing. It's what its function is,
Yes.
and you got it. You get it. Ditto. The flyer. You don't think, but in what way am I going for the? In what way is
Right.
happy hour happy hour? Um, it's it's there's it's text. There's no subtext. It's all there. Um, so I find that definition really useful, and I do see that there is art, there is AI which definitely does not astonish me, is the word you use in your video, which I
Yeah.
think is a very interesting word. The idea of also the sublime comes into that, something that's between states, that is utterly numinous or ineffable. You can't grab it, you can't quite articulate it. That's what art does. It is the incomprehensible. It is the quivering, on the edge of meaning. Then I worry that the problem isn't going to be that art won't satisfy those needs. And I think this is a point you kind of made, but you please correct me if I'm wrong here. But that AI would just and ultimately capitalism will just change those needs, so we no longer think that's what we want, and AI will invent the thing that it will then satisfy, and that thing will be much more limited
Right.
than art is, because art is ultimately creating a space which it then can't fill. It's like a cigarette, what Oscar Wilde said about a cigarette. It's
Right.
the perfect vice because it's not satisfactory, and that is what art is. It's
Yes.
constantly dissatisfying you in a way that's creative and interesting.
Yeah, I think there's definitely already a disconnect where I think our culture has already sort of devalued art to a degree, or art appreciation is not very consciously cultivated or taught uh, broadly within modern culture. Um, and this is, I want to give credit to J.F. Martel, who wrote the book Reclaiming Art in the Age of Artifice, for this kind of definition and breakdown and some of these ideas. It's a great book, and I think people should go read it. He wrote it in 2015, so it was kind of before this latest movement, but he was already kind of identifying this kind of slipping into a world where most of the images we see are artifice. And that's not necessarily bad. We're not making like too strong of like a value judgment about that. He is, and I'm also not. He's not, and I'm also not trying to make that. It's more of just like what is the purpose of each of these things? Obviously we need the event flyers, and to some extent, although I'm quite skeptical of advertising, like you could even make an argument like we need advertising to some extent, or those kinds of things. There's forms of artifice that benefit or facilitate the function of society as a whole. So it's not bad, but if we lose sight of this kind of the separation between those two things, and that it does actually exist, and that there is this other thing called art that is something more, even if we can't quite put our finger on what that thing is, it's like all the things you mentioned. It helps facilitate astonishment or contemplation of life. And it does that both for the viewer and for the artist in the process of doing it. It's like a form of expression and communication and all these things. And it's something that kind of arises out of us sort of instinctually. We might do it within a commercialized framework or within a capitalism which is facilitating the creation of the piece of art. But I think like an important piece of that is that the like underlying impulse to do it is not just to make money. It's like something else that we're trying to find. Um, and so I think in a lot of ways our culture has already lost sight of this kind of like distinction. And that's why we see a certain number of people who are already looking at the stuff AI is making, and they look at the argument that I'm making and they're almost like, what are you even talking about? Like this is, you're just like, you're just reacting against what is obviously the next evolution, or like this image is clearly, look, it made a pretty image, and also Monet made pretty images. Like, what's the difference here? Um, and I'm like, that perspective to me only seems possible if you don't have a concept of art, that takes into account these more like uh ineffable qualities, or these almost spiritual reasons that we have for engaging with art as like a medium of expression.
I mean, that is the thing that worries me, and the thing that makes me, and this might be old codger speak, so it could easily be something that I will be really happy to be proven wrong, and I really suspect I will be. I really suspect I will be. I just think that is my inner codger talking, but I worry that Ted Sarandos, the head of Netflix, said that the main competitor for Netflix was sleep. And I
Yeah.
think to some degree, the competitor for Netflix is also to some degree art, because if you're making programs, I mean, you made this point. I thought it was a really good point of the two screen TV show or series or whatever that is designed for you to watch it while you're on your phone, or while you're doing something
Yeah.
else. So it's kind of radio with pictures, or it's, you won't lose track of what's going on. And more importantly, if you put everything away, if you put your phone in phone jail, the way I do when I'm watching a movie, and you sit down and you watch it with 100% of your attention, it's pointless, because that's not how it's supposed to be watched. It's like, I mean, I know if I went to see the cricket, or in America, if you go and see the baseball, there's very few spectators are glued to the field at all times, because that's just not culturally how you take in that experience. You're supposed to be looking around and chatting with your friends and looking for where the hot dog guy is and all the rest of it. And the same thing is going to be true of
Yeah.
these, I mean, going back to cinema a little bit, when I hear of people saying, "Oh, we should open up cinemas to sort of tweet-alongs," and yeah, not only use your phone, but will encourage you to use your phone, will be part of the experience. There's a bit of me that's like, oh man, we've lost it completely, haven't we? This is
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
making it impossible. And last point, and then I'll concede the space. Um, the food thing. Um, you don't eat in church. There are certain there are certain spaces where we go, we're doing this and nothing else. And I feel, yeah, except obviously the body of Christ if you're a Christian, specifically if you're a Catholic. um,
That's the role of popcorn.
well, yeah, well, yes, because that it sort of has a similar sort of quality of dissolving. Um, Yeah, it just strikes me as like you're not going to make this more popular by making it more ordinary. Its popularity
Yes.
depends on its extraordinariness because that's the thing that ranks it, that distinguishes it as unique amongst the things that we do. If going to the cinema on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday night is the same as doing everything else we do, then why buy a ticket? Why spend that amount of money on it? And similarly, if TV is becoming like what you're watching on Instagram, why turn on the TV? Why not just look at your
Yeah.
phone for the entirety of your lives? That bit is scary to me. That's the moment
Yeah.
that I'm thinking our umwelt is being tightened to a very small circumference.
Yeah, I think, there's a larger question at play here, which is all various industries right now are reckoning with this shift in attention I kind of alluded to earlier. So like cinema and perhaps television even are unseated as sort of the dominant cultural force. And I so much of my thinking about this and my work is informed by Marshall McLuhan and just this like core
Mhm.
idea of like let's look at the medium as the message and like how mediums relate to each other and what these changes are. And so we have this shift that's happened over the last decade towards our attention going to our phone and towards that medium, and that becoming the dominant medium. It takes up more space, it takes up more attention, it also changes how we relate to everything else, and everything else is struggling with understanding how to compete with this new thing, this phone, social media, TikTok, Instagram, all of these things. And they're a little bit like flailing about, for any answer to this question. They're like, oh, how do we how do we compete? How do we keep the attention that we have? Um, and and some of that is what we've talked about in the cinemas, make it more premium, go big, even bigger with IMAX. Some of these things work, some of them don't. But I think like the point I want to get across is I think the way to compete is to lean more into the things that separate it from what's on our phone and in our living room rather than becoming more similar to that. Because I think if you're trying to compete by becoming more of the same thing, you're going to lose that competition because that's where, the money that's behind this industry, the tech space is just insane. They have so many resources they can pour into these apps and designing these products and making them as attention grabbing as possible. And some companies like Netflix are trying to compete with that more directly by doing the same thing, pouring just a ton of money into it, making it as sort of like sticky as possible, but also like creating content that facilitates experiencing it while you're on your phone. And I've heard secondhand sources. I can't necessarily confirm all of this, but they have very specific guidelines for how, a scene cannot be more than 7 minutes in length or whatever, because that's when people lose attention, and all of these directives that Netflix has for how they produce their content. And they're trying to compete with this machine that's trying to gobble up everyone's attention. um, and maybe in the long run, if you make some of those changes, maybe Netflix is wins, quote unquote, in the sense that they have more of the attention, more people put their time and energy into that, they have more subscribers, they make more money. But they're becoming this other thing in doing that, and we lose out on this experience that is cultivated in like a cinematic setting, that I think is lovely and valuable and something we should retain. And not because it's like the greatest thing that was ever invented. I don't want to slip into a kind of elitism where it's like cinema is the one true media form or art form. But I'm just like, I also don't want to see us just let go of the parts of it that I like and are valuable, because we don't have any regard for what makes it unique and what makes it interesting as an experience, and just say, oh, well, all of that can be discarded. We'll just become like TikTok, but you sit in a room with other people and watch TikTok on a screen. It's like, well, I already have TikTok on my phone. I want to keep this other thing that we call cinema and be able to experience that as well. And AI, the way AI relates to all of that is like, I think AI is another way, TV companies, streamers, they're all flailing about and they're like, ooh, here's this new shiny thing. Maybe we can use that to make our productions more cost effective, or to make like whatever they're imagining they're going to use AI for. And in my mind, I'm like, no, now you're trying to become the thing that you're competing with. You're going to lose that battle to the AI, because anything you can build with AI, somebody will be able to build themselves with AI. So like the middleman, AI is cutting out the middleman. You just go directly to the AI to get the piece of entertainment that you want. So it doesn't make any sense to me for these entertainment companies to be going, oh, well, we'll use AI to make the entertainment, because it's like, the future that the AI companies are headed towards is one where you just generate the entertainment for yourself. So the only value that's left in the entertainment industry is by staying away from that and being like, no, we have this other thing that's like human crafted, and and so it's almost like giving into the very thing that will be like, that will just make you like everything else and lose your competitive edge, I think. But I get that that's scary in this moment where it feels like the rug is being pulled out from under the industry in so many ways.
I mean, I think it's almost like if you are doing everything by the algorithm, then the algorithms are always going to defeat you. If you're chasing algorithms, then you're thinking like the machine, and you're making
Right.
and you're there is a sense when the viewer is doing that, or when we're doing that. I mean, I notice this. You'll have noticed this far more than me, I imagine, as a YouTuber, in that that YouTube, how many people leave one of the videos that you've produced after 1 minute, after 30 seconds, and all the rest of it, and you'll know all the, if you want people to stay, you've got to write a long explanation of what the episode is about, or use a certain number of words. And we had SEO, which apparently AI has completely torn to pieces. So and if we're on TikTok, or we're on, you only do minute long videos, because so we get to a point where we're doing what the machine wants, so that when the machine comes along and says, actually, we can do what you've just been doing much better because we're better at dealing with algorithms, then we have no position, no shred of humanity left, to quote somebody, on which to stand and on which to justify our unique existence. So I see we in your video and just talking now, we mentioned certain artists: Jackson Pollock, Edward Hopper, Monet, but we also know that the vast majority of art is not necessarily that good, and
Right. Yes.
and
Yeah.
that art has worth, even though
Yeah.
even though it's not necessarily at those heights of and it feels like that art is the stuff that is really vulnerable to AI, in that, yeah, no, it's not gonna, change your life, but the sort of the kind of romance novels that people would churn out, the I mean, I saw a headline about a country and western song which was the highest charting non-human song, and you
Oh,
just
yes. Yeah.
sort of think, well, that's just going to become more and more present, and there's going to come a point where, and again, here is my old codginess, there's going to come a point where, as you enter, I don't know if you have these in America, but when we enter a supermarket here, we might have like a part of the fresh vegetables which will say sort of bio, and we've not used pesticides, we've not used anything, or free range chickens over here or something like that, and it will be, you'll pay a premium, but these are not chickens that have been kept in cages their entire lives, and these are vegetables that have not been sprayed with cancer-inducing chemicals, or chemicals, full stop. And you buy them and you feel good about yourself, and maybe they taste better and maybe they're healthier, who knows? But you're buying into the ideology of what they represent as well. That's what you're really paying for. And is that what's going to happen? You're going to go on Apple Music or you're going to go on Spotify, and there's going to be a genre of, this is going to be human music. This is human made
Right.
music, and it's different from all the other music because all the rest of the music is AI. Are we going to go on Kindle? Because I know that there are now literally thousands, hundreds of thousands of books now available on Kindle which have been written by AI, and they're just, they're out there, and the person publishing them can publish 100 novels a day, and they don't need 100 people to buy one book. They need one person to buy one each of those novels to start making money. And so that sort of monetization of just slop, and I
Yeah.
feel that I don't think Picasso is in any danger. I think, you know uh I'm trying to think of I'm trying to think of a lower artist, but I don't want to. I don't want to. Who's the I
Yeah.
don't want to insult
I know what you're
anybody.
talking about,
Bob
though. It's like,
Ross. you know.
right, yeah. Well, it's the stuff you can go see in like a local gallery in your
Yeah,
community, and there's an artist who maybe they've been a lifelong artist and they're making some work, and you can buy. It's not going to be in the Louvre or whatever, but it's still like a tangible part of existence. You can go appreciate it. They're making it. They're maybe even making a living off of it. That kind of stuff I think is really threatened. Um, and those artists maybe had a certain following they had built up on Instagram or something like that, and now they're suddenly competing with, like, type in whatever image you want comes up, and there's a devaluing in that. I think that's going to happen, and I think there's going to be that, in a way, is kind of just an acceleration of this just being flooded with um, every image imaginable was already kind of happening on
mm,
on the internet. There's, already sort of a inflation of the image that has happened to the point where, just like, there's a clip in uh Wim Wenders documentary, is it a notebook on cities and clothes, or I don't remember which one, but Werner Herzog shows up and they're in this tower at the top of
mm,
Tokyo. They're looking out over it, and Herzog, in his typical, like, Herzog fashion, is like, "Oh, the image is dead. You would have to go to Mars to find like a um a powerful image." Um which, is maybe a little hyperbolic, but like he was saying that in the 70s, just like looking at, like, okay, the way modernity has created just like this artifice that surrounds us at all times makes it very difficult to be moved to have this like encounter with an individual image or piece of art that will like move us and usher us into whatever this space is that art can help facilitate.
But
So
could,
AI is just like speeding that up. But I think my hope is, and then I'll let you
sure,
respond.
sure.
My hope is that there's a reaction to the online and the digital space being infiltrated by this stuff that brings us back into the real world in a way where we start to value you. Okay, you know, I can see an infinite number of generated images on my phone. That makes me look at like a hand painted work of art that I could buy from an artist that lives in my city in a different way, because now that represents something that an image of a work of art on my phone doesn't represent anymore. You know, so I hope we see that, and I don't think like culture is gonna just like right itself, and then we're gonna end up with like art as the valued thing. But I hope there's this subculture that emerges in the midst of this, hopefully a strong and vibrant one, for the people who do value, you know, really value this stuff and want to continue to like interact with it. Yeah, I have hope that will happen, or like I think it's something we need to intentionally try to create.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I do think people get tired of their phones, and I think young people are particularly good at this. Actually, I think old people like me, our defenses were down, and we were like, we thought we were cock of the walk, and then all of a sudden we find, we're not quite as in control of this technology as we thought we were. Whereas my daughters have grown up with it, and they're very careful about how they use technology, much more so than I am. I think it's interesting that you saying that thing about Werner Herzog and looking out the window, and talking about how the image is dead, because then you sort of think, yeah, but if I remember like Solaris and Tarkovsky and how he wanted to film sort of going to space, and so he didn't want to use a cliche, so he just filmed driving through Tokyo, and that became,
Right.
yeah, that became space, or Jean-Luc
Yeah,
Godard
yeah.
used, Paris at night for Alphaville, um, and you just sort of think, yeah, there's that. If you watch that scene today, or you watch, the almost innumerable scenes that you could, they're just so much, they're so striking, and there is so much in the world that is not looked at with attention, that when it
Yeah.
suddenly is, you saw, this is why, we met at the Cannes Film Festival. I love going to film festivals and seeing cinema from all over the world, because somebody will suddenly be pointing their camera at something I've never seen before, and you'll just think,
Yes.
wow, to jump from something like that to the beginning of Tom Cruise in War of the Worlds, and the fact that he's operating a crane, and thinking, when have I ever seen a crane operator as the
Yeah.
hero of a film? And suddenly it's very real and tangible, and that, yeah, I could have watched 30 minutes of him on that crane and in that
Yeah.
environment, because it felt real and it felt unnoticed. And actually, for all these thousands of films that Hollywood produces every year, we have a very narrow realm of interest. It's policemen, it's the military, it's maybe
Yeah.
doctors, it's rom-coms, it's rich people, it's all the sort of upper middle class, not the middle class that are working and struggling usually. And so, actually, if you really want to make something which doesn't stink of AI, or doesn't stink of sort of pre-AI, something which could easily be taken over by AI, make a piece of art about something that isn't being looked at. Point the camera
Yeah.
somewhere else.
And that's really coming back to kind of one of the things I was alluding to earlier with what are the things that sets cinema apart in this landscape? And one of those things is the ability to sustain attention
Mm.
on something. So you get people, you put them in a room, hopefully if you're watching a film at home, you're not on your phone. That's at least the intended way, the way the director is hoping you're watching it.
No
But in
food.
a cinema as well. No food. You're sort of forcing them to be like, okay, you are, unless you walk out of the theater, which, you know, most of us probably do occasionally, but that's like a very specific action that you have to take. You're kind of, by going to a movie, you're saying, okay, I'm going to offer myself to whatever this film has for like a couple hours. And then the filmmaker has the opportunity to not just say, look at this image, but like, let me sustain your attention on whatever this image is. And I think that's part of that power too. So like on our phone, we might be flipping through whatever platform and see, wow, there's a tornado, and then some disaster that's happening, and then a funny, someone's falling down, and then another thing. We might see these very like potent images in quick succession, and uh, and I think that's the sort of the death of image that Herzog is talking about, where it's just like there's so much variety that like the potency of any one single frame feels like it's
It's
been
all
reduced
flattened out.
incredibly. Yes. But then what does the social media not give you? It's like, okay, take that thing and pay attention to it. And then in the cinema you can go pay attention to it, and here's how it relates to a larger story and a life. And let me like use sound design and editing and performance to like bring, not just like direct your attention towards that image, but then hopefully like bring you into that image and that space, and have you kind of slip into it and forget that you're not there, that you're not a part of it. And I think those are all things that cinema does very well that our phones have a much harder time of invoking. And so that's what we have to be conscious of is like how do you use that as a filmmaker, and how do you do that in a compelling way, and like give people something through that experience. But to say one other thing, I love that you also brought up like world cinema and seeing these things from around the world, because that was something that struck me at Cannes this year specifically, is like so much of this conversation about, oh, Hollywood is dying or what's happening to movies, it's very like centered on US and British cinema to a certain extent, in those industries, and like how they have been the dominant cultural force in cinema. And when I look at like the landscape of global cinema, I don't have this sensation of we're losing something, because it's so vibrant and alive like around the globe, and you can see really beautiful, interesting stuff. People are still experimenting with form. And I think there's kind of a myopic view on the current era from a lot of like English speakers, where I think like in the longer span of film history, in another like 30 or 40 years, when we look back on this era, we'll see all this incredible filmmaking that was happening, and we'll be like, oh yes, the big Hollywood stuff that was maybe not as good as it once was, and that era was sort of like dying out perhaps, or whatever. But look at all this other incredible stuff that was happening at that time. And yeah, I'm very hopeful for cinema in that sense. I think there's fascinating stuff happening everywhere.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point, and I think that's a great place for us to sort of wrap up our conversation, because it is important to sort of look through both ends of the telescope and microscope. You've got to, and sort
Yeah.
of yeah. There's a that is that is why the ecosystem of festivals can be really really important, and why some streaming services will help us to see things which are beyond our horizons, and in doing so also inspire us, because why was American cinema so great in the 1970s? Because everybody was watching French cinema in the 1960s.
Yes.
And why was
Yeah.
French
Yeah.
cinema so great in the 1960s? Because they were all watching American cinema that they hadn't been in the 1950s, that they hadn't been able to see during the war. And so they were having all these classics
Yeah.
from the 30s and 40s, being released every single day. There was a new film in Paris. So hopefully we will have still some way to go before cinema, creaks to an end. But even when it does, I think the language of cinema will continue no matter whatever the next art form, if it's gaming or if it's something else. We already see it in gaming today. The language of gaming is first and foremost cinematic. Wonderful, Thomas. I really enjoyed that chat. I will put a link to your YouTube channel, which is simply called Thomas Flight, in the show notes. And I think you have a Substack as well, right?
Yes, you can find my Substack at seeingthroughfilm.com. Yeah, and I haven't been doing a great job of writing there this year, but I'm hoping to write more there in 2026. So
I'm never sure.
That usually
never sure about Substack. I've kind of like, there's a bit of me feels like I'm giving it away for free, and I should, I don't like to charge people because why would you? Because if I charge people, then I'll have to write like a minimum of 4 or 5 pieces or something. It's not. I don't like the model. I'm not sure about it, but your work is good. That's worth looking at, definitely.
Yeah, it's almost all free there. People can pay if they want to, but that's more of like a voluntary, like if you want to support the work. Almost all of the stuff I publish there is like available for free. It's mostly like sometimes I have an idea and I'm like, this is something I want to write about, but it's a little too esoteric for like the YouTube algorithm to get any kind of traction. So off to the Substack it goes. So maybe I could figure out a better place to put those things. But for now, that's the bin for all my worst ideas or best ideas, depending on what perspective you're coming from.
Absolutely. And sometimes I put something on Substack and it sort of it really gets a readership, and I think, God damn it, I should have pitched that somewhere else. I could have earned some money off that. Brilliant, Thomas. Thank you so much for joining me. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Always great to chat, John. I appreciate it.